Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, and for our speakers and participants joining us from Africa, a very good morning to you. My name is Winnie from the Africa, Europe, Middle East, and Central and South Asia Department of SBF, and I'll be your MC for our Festival Africa Edition webinar today on opportunities in Africa's growing consumer goods market. Festival is an initiative under this Global Connect at SBF program aimed at helping Singapore companies learn more about the opportunities and business environments in overseas markets so that they might land with business deals and/or investment projects and eventually localize in their markets of interest with a well-grounded and sustainable business presence for long-term growth. Before we begin, please allow me to acknowledge the support of our partners and speaking organizations, Enterprise Singapore, Canberra, PwC, CapFam Ghana Limited, the Tolaram Group, and Grand Oils and Food Singapore. Our webinar today would not be possible without our partners and speakers' strong and invaluable support. Now, just a quick reminder on some courtesy points and house rules. Please keep your microphones on mute so that the webinar will not be disrupted. If you have any questions during the presentation, you can type them into the Q&A box in Zoom throughout the duration of the webinar. We will try our best to have your questions answered during the panel and Q&A segments of the webinar. We also seek your understanding and help in respecting our speakers and their generosity in sharing with you their insights. Our webinar today is entitled Opportunities in Africa's Growing Consumer Goods Market, and aimed at helping Singapore companies better understand the consumer landscape in Africa, as well as how Singapore consumer goods companies could potentially benefit from Africa's growing demand for modern consumer goods. For this purpose, we have invited Mr. Adafi Erhi, partner and consumer and industrial products and services industry leader of the Nigerian office of PwC, a global consulting firm operating in Africa as the largest provider of professional services with partners across the African continent, to give an overview of the consumer landscape in Africa. Mr. Charles Antwi Bowen, the founder and CEO of CapFam Ghana, the biggest wholly Ghanaian-owned electronics and home appliances company in Ghana. Mr. Deepak Singhal, Executive Director and Managing Director of Consumer Business of the Tolaram Group, a Singapore conglomerate with an international portfolio of diversified business interests, including consumer goods business operations, bringing consumer products to over 500 million people across Africa. And Mr. Sean Jararatnam, Business Head for Packaged Oils and Foods from Grand Oils and Food Singapore. He's a Singapore industry veteran who has had extensive experience working with various multinational companies for the African market to share with us their knowledge, insights, and experience. For today's program, we will start off with a presentation by Mr. Adafi Erhi to provide us with an overview of Africa's consumer goods sector, some potential challenges and opportunities, as well as some insights into markets and potential growth areas which Singapore companies could consider. After the presentation, we will then proceed with a roundtable panel discussion on seizing business opportunities in Africa's growing consumer markets with our business leaders from Singapore and African firms operating in Africa's consumer markets. Before we go into our program proper, just a quick introduction to Global Connect at SBF. As briefly mentioned earlier, Global Connect at SBF is an initiative aimed at assisting Singapore companies looking to internationalize and deepen their presence in overseas markets. It assists by partnering with Singapore companies on their internationalization journey through three pillars of learn, land, and localize. Global Connect at SBF assists by helping Singapore companies learn about markets and overseas business opportunities. So we do this, for example, by sharing useful resources such as curated market information, free trade agreement advisory, structured trainings through workshops, and not to mention webinars such as the one you're attending today. We also organize business missions and learning journeys where Singapore companies can experience and appreciate the local business and operating environments of overseas markets. Global Connect at SBF also aims to help Singapore companies land in overseas markets with business deals and investment projects through our platforms for B2B matching, market advisors, and three Singapore enterprise centers currently operating in Jakarta, Indonesia, Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam, and Bangkok, Thailand. Global Connect at SPF also seeks to help more Singapore companies to localize by deepening their presence in markets they have entered, leveraging the trusted relationships abroad, and achieving sustainable long-term growth in their markets of interest. So we now have an audience poll. So if you're interested to get in touch with us on Africa and various assistance available, please indicate yes to the questions for the poll. You can also contact us via Global Connect at SPF's email shown on the slide. Thank you very much for your patience. Now, without further ado, please allow me to invite Mr. Adafe Erhi from PwC Nigeria to kick off our program today with his presentation on Africa's consumer goods market. Adafe, please.
Hi, Wayne.
Oh, hi.
Apology.
No problem.
Apology. My network went off briefly, but I'm back.
Yep. So please feel free to tell my my colleagues to start your slides.
Yes, please. Good afternoon, everybody. I think it's morning to us in most of Africa right now. It's my pleasure to talk to you about the opportunities in Africa. My name is Adafe Erhi. I work for PricewaterhouseCoopers in Nigeria. I'm part of the Broad Africa Partnership, a member firm of PwC. We're in about 34 countries of the 54 African countries with 66 offices. We're the largest professional service firm by our footprint and number of staff across, and we're well positioned to support businesses that want to expand to Africa and establish their presence and their products here. So over the next 15-20 minutes, I'll talk to you about our broad opportunities in Africa. We've titled this slide "So Much in Stores," and I'm sure at the end of listening to the roundtable discussions and even this production, you know how much we have in store for you. We'll broadly look at overview. Definitely there are challenges, but the opportunity surpasses those challenges. Then there's a brief slide on winning in Africa. Then we'll dive into the panel discussion. Please, next slide. Next slide. Africa is made up of about 54 countries. I think the mix-up sometimes for most people is they confuse Africa as a single country. No, it's a diverse country of 54 different, diverse continent of 4 different countries. But the opportunity are as diverse as the countries themselves. We have a population of about 1.3 billion. With 60% of that below the age of 25. That created huge opportunity on its own. There's so much optimism. We've seen the growth over the last 10 years in Africa economy. Most of the European, American, and even Asian companies have been doing business here for a number of years and doing very well. Africa definitely represents a huge market for the fast-moving consumer. Middle class emerge with more disposable income. We've seen that over the last few years, and we've seen the changing taste. There's definitely a scope for improvements. Right now, the focus and the growth area has been more around the food sector, but we're seeing increase in disposable income, leading to a change in lifestyle and a much more demand in a bit of the luxury subsector goods. Even electronic and stuff like that, we've seen growth in that, and you hear more of that when we talk of our panel experience and practical growth example. In terms of population, there are parties around. Nigeria represent about 20% of the Africa-wide populations. Then you talk about Ethiopia and Egypt too, with a very dense population. But again, when we talk of population, you need to be careful because the cities tend to have a bit more agglomeration. That means in terms of the concentration of individuals, leading to urbanization and stuff like that. But very key, what most people need to think around is because of the challenges around infrastructure. For companies that have done very well in Africa, it's around conquering the distribution challenges and winning there. I'm sure by the time we have the Tolerant examples and even Cap Farm, you see how they've successfully done this. Next slide, please. The AfDB, the Africa Development Bank, did talk of disposable income of Africa around about 1.85 million Africans, which is about 20% of it, daily capital between $3 and $5, and another 77 million between 4 and whatever. But food, as I said, does dominate the African consumption pattern, again, because of the level of income. Most of Africans depend heavily on staple food, and we've seen companies that have done that succeed very well, which is, again, understanding the landscape. A very important point to understand about the African market is a lot of it is informal. In terms of structured retail distribution, I think apart from South Africa, which is a bit on the high double digit, most of the African countries are the low double digits. You have the informal, family-run businesses dominating the retail space. But we've seen that changing, whether it's in the large cities like Lagos, Accra, Cairo, Luanda, even in Rabat up north. We've seen those changing and the landscape changing. Again, the weakness of our currencies across the African continent is an example around repatriating. We've seen tightening of monetary policy to improve on this. Very key too, when entering into Africa, you need to think of different strategies. For example, people have thought of the hub strategy using Kenya to penetrate the east and central Nigeria for the west. We'll talk a bit around this too when we look at AfCFTA and a few others. I've mentioned the road infrastructure, poor road infrastructure, but broadly that tells you about the Africa landscape. We'll dive a bit more now into the challenges and the opportunities itself. Next slide, please. I think the way we describe the opportunity in Africa, we use the word young, urban, and mobile, and they are well connected. If you're just listening to my first two slides, I talked about Africa population being young. 60% of that is below the age of 25. That creates a huge opportunity and a huge demand for product. It means the workforce is there to do the work and even the consumption itself. And we've seen that over the last 10 years, as I mentioned, slowed down a bit by COVID, but we have seen an upturn in that in the last 1 year again. By 2025, nearly 2/3 of the estimated 303 million Africans will have discretionary income to be able to spend, which creates a huge demand. Urbanization, just like most other continents itself, we've seen a huge attraction to the urban cities. Again, Africa has seen a huge, and I think it has the largest rates of urbanization. If you look at, if you compare it to other rival continents, Brazil, Russia, India, China. So that definitely is a huge attraction for companies looking to enter Africa. Now, I've seen a lot of the European fast-moving consumer companies take advantage of the urbanization and the young population. The last point there around mobile and connected, Africa, I think there's seen a huge penetration of the mobile technology in terms of connection, in terms of even doing business. In Kenya, for example, I think the M-Pesa, we've seen about $2 billion being moved around using that platform. In other parts of Africa, we've seen e-commerce come on trend with companies like Jumia, providing access even to global markets. And we've seen that as a huge advantage and a huge way to even try your product out in Africa by partnering with some of these e-commerce and businesses. I think the last point that underpins all of this is the Africa Continental Free Trade Area agreement that was signed this year, but it's been in the works for the last 10 years. The idea behind this is to try to deepen the economic integration of the Africa. I think this will create one of the largest economic area if successfully implemented, especially for businesses with value added heavily within Africa. This creates its own huge opportunity, given the challenges around moving within Africa and moving goods within Africa. Next slide, please. Thank you. Challenges. Africa, like any other market itself, has its challenges. I won't talk to you about the opportunity without considering the challenges itself, because those challenges are there, but the opportunities and the growth area are huge. We've talked about political instability and conflict, especially for the smaller country within Africa. Poor infrastructure, that will create its own opportunity for growth too, because we've seen most companies come in and actually take advantage of this to create a huge, what we call a huge control of the value chain itself, from introducing their good to distribution completely. Linguistic diversity, that creates opportunity for companies to be creative in understanding the demand itself and tailoring their product to meet those specific. Difference in consumer behavior. I think the biggest mistake any company will make to assume that Africa is one single entity that the consumers behave the same way. Because if you look at just within the countries themselves, the demand within Luanda, for example, if you look at Angola, differs from the other parts, as most of the consumers there are upscale, well-paid and stuff like that. So understanding some of that difference in behavior help in winning in those markets. The other point there about fragmented retail, I talked around that. Most of the markets are fragmented. You tend to see the informal sector dominate most of Africa. I think South Africa is a bit of a difference here, where about 75% of their retail business are drawn to the formal sector. The last point there about challenges is around low data availability and quality of those data. But again, we've seen this change over the last few years with a few more established research and marketing company providing support for a lot of the international company looking to come in and set up. And PwC, for example, is one of those companies providing support to understanding the African market and supporting you establishing your product and establishing your presence here. Next slide, please. I decided to include a slide about winning the African consumer market because it's key. The purpose of this webinar itself is to support you and create the information around how you can win and succeed in the African market. I think very key, if you listen to what I've said in the last 5-10 minutes, it's you need to take a granular view of growth, because most successful entrepreneurs are those that have carefully have been selective in the market they enter. A big mistake you may make, we assume, for example, that a country like Nigeria has 200 million people, and those 200 million people has the same type of demand and disposable income. If we take again, if I talk of Luanda, where about 60% of consumer demand are actually based in Angola, 60% of the demand in Angola is based in Luanda. Or Lagos, where the level of income in Lagos is twice what you see in the overall country average. Or if you talk of Cairo in Egypt, the same thing you see around it. So there's a word, the second point, they talk of city-based strategy. So you focus in trying to enter this market, maybe you focusing on those large and well-concentrated cities with the right demand for your product and stuff like that. The third point, they talk of understanding the consumer demand. We've seen most of the fast-moving consumer goods companies take time to understand those demands and continuously changing their strategy. We do have, I think, a European company that came in with a detergent, selling detergent within the market itself. And they've changed their strategy over the years, introducing lower pack and the price point just to try to penetrate the market and establish themselves more in the non-city-based demand point. The fourth point, I talk of tailoring your offer to local needs and preferences. We've seen global companies come in, and if after a couple of years, they look at what the need be, whether it's the beverage, even the beer market, they look for what the locals want, either call it what they want, and add products specifically that will include the taste and the demand of those markets. Whether you're talking of Zambia, Lagos, Nigeria, Accra, even up north in Morocco, Egypt. The idea of winning is you look at the market, you need to tailor your product to suit the demands there, while you still continue to sell and introduce your global products. The fifth point, I talk of having a bespoke route to market model by geography and channel. I think that's key too. The African market has its challenges around infrastructure, but a good understanding of that means you now need to tailor your route to market to suit that, and continuously look at that and fine-tune it as the market changes and the taste and demand of your consumers are changing. The last point there, again, if you talk about the informal structure of the market, will mean a well-oiled sales force will be required. Again, structured in line with the informal structure, which means you have sales force engaged in the market at every point. Another way of dealing with this may be partnering with well-established local distributors. And again, when we have a panel discussion, I'm sure you hear about how a few of the well-established companies and distributors are winning in this space and have supported global firm entry into Africa. Next slide, please. I think this slide talks of which countries are the most lucrative. Again, you need to consider this in line with what I said about not having a whole view about a single country, as in there may be cities within those countries that are winning point. But South Africa, Nigeria, Egypt has the largest consumer market currently and are still expanding. By 2030, they will still be the largest. But definitely those are not the only countries. Ghana, Kenya, Morocco, Sudan, Nigeria, Angola, Tunisia, Tanzania. Different type of demand, different type of market, but a huge and potential has arisen in those markets. Example of this with 4 countries in Tanzania, for example, which are able to form part of the top 10 fastest growing city in the continent by 2024. So having a look at Africa, why you may tailor specific is these are huge markets that have shown their potentials and are still growing. Next slide, please. Next slide. I think as we titled this presentation, really, Africa has so much in store for entrants. I think the key point is you need to understand the market itself. You need to tailor your product to the market itself. You need to understand the challenges and again, structure your route to market properly. But overall, you need to know that it has to be a long haul plan. Those that have stayed around, I'm sure you hear the story of Tolaram in Nigeria and across other countries in Africa. They've been around, and African consumer reward brand that they trust. A brand that win them over can thrive in the market for decades to come, and that's very key to keep in mind. And if this is your only takeaway, it just means there's so much in store for Singapore company coming to Africa. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Adafe, for your insightful presentation on consumer goods and retail landscape in Africa. May I now invite our 3 business leaders, Mr. Charles Antwi Bowen, founder and CEO of CapFam Ghana Limited, Mr. Deepak Singhal, Executive Director and Managing Director of Consumer Business from the Tolaram Group, Mr. Sean Jayaratnam, Business Head for Packaged Oils and Foods from Grand Oils and Foods Singapore, to join Mr. Adafe and me for our webinar's roundtable panel discussion on seizing opportunities in Africa's growing consumer goods market. Can I get the panelists to turn on the video, please?
Hi, Wenying.
Hi, Sean. Okay,
Hi.
so I think for the start, I'd like to invite each of you to give a brief introduction of your respective companies and what your company's business interests in Africa are, so as to give our audience a bit of background and context before we go into our panel discussion. So first we can start with Charles, then Deepak, and then Sean for your introductions, please. So I think Charles has some slides as well.
Yes. All right. So, hi everyone. Good morning here in Africa. I'm sure it's pretty late over there. I mean, in the evening in Singapore. So I'm Charles Enchiboin. I'm the Chief Executive of CapFarm. CapFarm, next slide, please. CapFarm is a wholly owned Ghanaian company into electronics and home appliances. We are the biggest electronics retail company in Ghana by market share, and established in 2013, started operating in 2014. Now we have 16 branches. As I said, largest electronics retail company in Ghana. I own the company 100%. We are the most visible electronics company in Ghana with over 800,000 likes on Facebook and 8,000 likes on Instagram, and with the highest visibility, I mean, in the country. We employ over 470 people directly and indirectly, because as you are aware, we are a distributor and retailer at the same time. So notable brands, we have Samsung, Toshiba, Media, Philips, Nasco, and Galaxy. It's a three-tier branded company. We don't only do high-end or low-end. We do all the brands to satisfy the various sections of the market, you know, the various tiers of the market. Next slide, please. Okay, so there's a few awards and corporate social responsibility items are indicated here. We've won virtually every available award there is to win in the country. National Multi-Brand Electronics Outlet of the Year this year, Electronics Company of the Year this year, Outstanding Ghanaian Owned Retail Brand of the Year this year, Outstanding Company of the Year. We won, the first one is last year, Outstanding Company of the Year award won last year. Best home appliance. I mean, almost every award there is to win, we've won in the country. We've also done a couple of corporate social responsibility. I just indicated a few here. We've renovated the Kolebu Teaching Hospital. It's the biggest hospital in Ghana. We adopted the chest disease department of that hospital. And we've done several cash donations to foundations, you know, NGOs, Breast Care International, the Ghana Military Academy, and also to one lady who was wrongfully incarcerated. We gave a lifeline. So these are a few things I want to share with you regarding CapFarm. And we are on a path to extensive growth. Last year, this year has been a bit slow, but we are on a serious path to extensive growth. When we come to the roundtable discussion, I will share with you the various opportunities and some of the challenges you should expect. I mean, there's a lot of opportunities here, but there are also a few challenges. But if you are very smart, you'll be able to navigate your way through everything and you succeed. I mean, the continent is a very profitable one. And I mean, there are several prospects you can look up to, very, very key prospects. One example, the economy of the GDP of Africa is supposed to grow to 29.7 trillion by 2050. Now it's 2.9 trillion by 2022. So you can imagine in a matter of 28 years time, I mean, the GDP of Africa is going to multiply by in 100-fold, and that is serious. I mean, if you are really serious about doing business in Africa, you have to consider it now, because this is the time. I mean, previously it was good, but now going forward, if you haven't, is the time. So let me leave you here, and I will hand over to women for the other panelists to continue. Thank you.
Okay, so may I invite Mr. Deepak to share a bit about Tolaram?
Good afternoon, Singapore, and good morning, Africa. Tolaram has been in Africa for since 1974. We are a Singapore-based company, and we are proud to say we are one of the largest Singapore company in Africa. We have operations in we have three verticals: the fast-moving consumer goods company, then we have the infrastructure, and we have the fintech. These are the three pillars of Tolaram Group. Consumer business being the largest business for us for now, in which we have various products. We are the largest in Nigeria, Ghana, in FMCG, and we are growing in other markets like South Africa, Egypt, Kenya, IVC. These are the markets for us. We also do a deep sea port in Nigeria, and we also have a free zone around the deep sea port, which is plug and play. to start any business in Nigeria. So that's, and we also have a fintech business in Indonesia, banking license and a fintech business. That's us in a nutshell. Tolaram, we employ around 22,000 people on the continent of Africa, and we have 24 manufacturing facilities. And we are an end-to-end solution provider in terms of consumer needs and consumer food. We partner with companies like Colgate, Kellogg, and Arla, and we've been instrumental in bringing them to Nigeria and some other countries in Africa. That's in a nutshell. Thank you.
So last but not least, can I get Sean to just give a brief introduction to his very interesting portfolio of companies?
Hi, everyone. Firstly, thank you everyone for taking time to join us here. I hope you'll find this session informative enough that it will ignite an interest for you to actually take that leap of faith and explore one or two of these African countries on the continent. My name is Sean Jeyaretnam. I am with Grand Oils and Food Singapore Private Limited. We are a subsidiary of Shanghai-based Grand Industrial Holdings. Our business interests covers pharmaceuticals, finance, commodities, and real estate. Grand Oils is primarily a palm oil refiner and a packer. Just before we started this whole conversation, I was telling my fellow panelists I'm probably the least experienced of the esteemed colleagues that I have over here. I've only got 15 years of experience on the African continent, but one thing I am very sure of, I think my passion for the continent is equal to any one of them on this panel, and I just love the continent. I hope by the time we are done here today, that passion would have rubbed off on some of you, and you would actually take that interest and move forward into the continent. So with that, I leave you here and pass it on to Wenying. Thank you very much.
No, thank you. Thank you, Charles, Deepak, and Sean for your introductions. So as mentioned earlier, the focus of our panel discussion today is about seizing opportunities in Africa's growing consumer goods market. So to kick off our panel discussion, I would like to start by asking Dafe to elaborate on some of the ideas he had presented earlier in the excellent overview he gave on Africa's consumer goods and retail landscape. But Charles, Deepak, and Sean, please feel free to chime in as well. So Dafe, in your presentation, you mentioned that most successful companies which have entered African markets are those that have been careful and selective about the markets that they enter. Could you perhaps share with us some pointers about how Singapore companies could go about identifying the markets they could start with in Africa? And what are some of the different approaches you might recommend for producers of different types of consumer products? For example, is there a difference between FMCG and other consumer products such as lifestyle goods or electronic products? Because Singapore companies produce quite a wide range of consumer goods. So if I may, Dafe, pick your brains on these ideas.
Thanks, Wayne. I think the first point there about being careful on the market you enter and be selective. Actually talking around looking at the demand and the ability to purchase, really, because across Africa, some of the most successful companies are those that have looked at the fastest growing cities or urban area. I think I mentioned this earlier where I talked around, if you look at the per capita income in Nairobi, for example, Kenya only is twice the country average. In Nigeria, you look at Lagos, where the earning power is twice the national average. Angola is another good example where Luanda accounts for about 45% of the total consumption of packaged goods and consumer goods. So the idea of being careful and deliberate, I think that's the key word here, is understanding your markets and the demand in those markets in penetrating. Because just looking at just the numbers only around, we have 50 million people may not tell the full story. So it's very good to get, if I would say that, professionals to help you too in understanding the market, and a company like PwC will be great in working with you, or even working with local distributors like Charles or Tolerant in Ghana or across other parts of Africa to understand those markets and how they're going. On the second question around difference between FMCG goods or other luxury goods. Again, I talked around the changing taste and demand pattern of African countries. Again, this is driven mainly by the level of income, where you see Africans moving in the food curve as they begin to meet those basic needs, because right now the consumption pattern show that food and other basic necessities dominate the consumer market. We've seen, especially in the cities again, we've seen some demand and growth in demand in luxury goods. Charles will tell you the success and the growth he has seen in electronics in Ghana. I'm sure if you listen to Tolerant too, you see them diversify from looking at just the basic to other part and type of food. This is estimated to continue to grow over the next decade. So definitely there's a huge demand and growing demand for other goods apart from just looking at basic consumer good or fast moving consumer good. The market is ready and just waiting to take that in. As I said, we've seen European countries, we've seen even Caribbean countries coming into Africa and Nigeria specifically with some of their condiment and some other type of food. For luxury goods from Europe and other parts, I've seen their way over the last 10 years again, given the increasing level of disposable income of the African continent.
Oh, hi. Yeah. So I've unmuted myself. Yeah. So we've actually got a question, Adafe. I think one of our participants, Ms. Sharon Chua, she's called on your point to that Africa is definitely a continent of 54 countries. So we shouldn't be looking at Africa as one single entity. She asks how we should decide like which country to go into first. So I think you might perhaps you could just kind of like spotlight a few countries that are growing a little bit faster in different consumer goods areas, if possible.
Again, I think one of my slides touch around this under the winning in Africa. If you look at where you do have the I think it's projected right now, if you look at, there are about 20 cities in Africa with the fastest growing patterns, whether in Nigeria, Cairo, Joburg, Luanda, Accra. I think we will go on, but about 20 cities with a huge growth pattern when you talk of consumer and demand itself. It is really understanding what these products are and what the demand in those markets are. So it's no, we can't use one paintbrush to paint, or just as you mentioned, Africa is a country made of 54 countries with different pattern of demand, different pattern of needs, and different pattern of behaviors itself. But it's key to understand that and make sure you tailor your goods and your route into those markets appropriately.
No,
Sorry,
yeah.
Winning, if I may add, I mean, from a personal experience myself, I mean, I think I've had that question asked. I asked that question myself 15 years ago. You know, which country would I be going into? And what I did, hopefully this would help Sharon as well. I mean, what I did was basically I did a lot of traveling with SBF, and I had SBF had organized a lot of business missions across Africa to the east as well as to the west. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, I spent about a year and a half just traveling across Africa with SBF, and I got to understand different countries. I got to understand the the FMCG market on the east as well as on the west, and that eventually, I came to a conclusion as to where I actually want to be and what products I want to actually look at selling to which country and which part of the continent, because the dynamics of the business in the east side of Africa and the west side of Africa is actually different. I mean, for that matter, I mean, the 54 countries, they're all different. I mean, you got the northern part of Africa, you got the Anglophone, and then you got the, the Francophone countries. So it's actually, if there's the luxury of time, but I think before you actually look at the luxury of time, I think you also got to decide, I mean, Africa is for the long run. I mean, when you enter the continent, when you decide to go into any of the countries in the continent, I mean, you got to look at it as a long run business. And then you actually start to do your research. I mean, Dafe is right. I mean, actually, frankly, I mean, Dafe's presentation basically covered everything that you need to know about going into Africa. And he's given you the whole conclusion. His conclusion is all there. I think all of us can agree with what he actually had said. But I think, it's good to look at the numbers. The numbers is one thing, but to spend time on the ground, that's another thing. Deepak has been there in Nigeria for the longest period of time. And, you have to live and breathe Africa. You got to understand what's really happening on the ground. So there's no one particular country we can actually tell you that you should be looking at going. If you want the largest consumer base, then of course you look at Nigeria. I mean, you can look at all the biggest markets like South Africa or Ethiopia, even for that matter, DRC. I mean, the population size down there is really huge. But you need to actually go look at different markets and then, see it for yourself and decide. That's what I can say.
Yeah, I think Sean, you really helped to lend a really good perspective on how companies might want to frame their decisions in order to explore Africa, because it is a really, really big continent and with very diverse markets. Perhaps the next question that I'm going to actually throw over to the three business leaders might help to kind of like elucidate some of the points. So I think Adefe's presentation earlier also mentioned about the key opportunity drivers in Africa, which you mentioned. So there are large growing young populations with rapid urbanization. Africa has some of the largest mega cities in the world today. There's also high mobile penetration, so there's a lot of leapfrogging. There's also growing e-payment capabilities to overcome some of the existing banking and payment issues. So Africa's really evolving right now. So, but maybe the question that I want to put forward to the business leaders that might tie into what Ms. Chua was asking just now was that, in your view, like what kind of maybe consumer products would do well, and what do companies looking to move into African markets kind of need to know about African consumers and their preferences? So that might perhaps help our Singapore companies kind of like do a bit of a framework on what exactly is it that what kind of products they could kind of bring to African markets, and kind of start looking into which markets might be more acceptable, which African consumers might be more accepting of their kind of products. So I might start with maybe Mr. Charles Andrew Bowen in terms of his perspectives, because he's doing electronics, and then maybe followed by Deepak and then Sean again. Charles, I think you're on mute.
All right. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I can't hear myself. So, all right. So basically, as Daffy mentioned, food is the easiest thing to think about. I mean, is the all over food that's best amongst all the. Can you hear me, Wayne?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so food that's best. Apart from food, you can look at fashion. Fashion, talking about health and beauty, hair, clothing, shoes. From top of my mind, it does best. I know a lot of companies who make a lot of profit, dealing in this kind of business. You can also talk about the entry model side of the CE business, that's the consumer electronics business. So like mobile phones, not too expensive mobile phones, and electronics and home appliances also move very, very, very quickly. If you consider e-commerce businesses, these are the fastest moving merchandise they trade in, and where they make a lot of profits, food, health and beauty, and then low-cost consumer electronics items. So these are the three things I think, if you really want to penetrate and make a lot of money and not to struggle too much, you can start off with. Of course, there are several dimensions of the market. I mean, you can look at other things like spare parts, chemicals and pharmaceuticals and all those things. I mean, they are also very, very fast moving and profitable. But what I feel, if I were Singaporean, what I would feel very comfortable to start off with, that's if the interest, you have the interest and the capability, will be start off with these three things I've mentioned. But of course, any other side of the economy, any other aspect of the economy will thrive. You have to always, I always say that the single most important thing, and I think Daffy made mention of that, is your distribution channel. I mean, no matter the business, is the distribution. I mean, is the distribution channel. So distribution, you talk about marketing, you talk about warehousing, logistics, you talk about collection. If you're only a distributor, I mean, if you're a distributor only without retail channel, and then you talk about after sales, and if you have this right, or if you get a partner with these four items I've mentioned on point, I mean, no matter the aspect of the economy or the sector of the economy, you do excellently well, because any business you want to do, I mean, the economy is prepared for it, So distribution is key. So you've got to look at very fast moving items if you don't want to struggle too much. And also you've got to look at a partner, or if you want to do it yourself, a very effective distribution channel. And to me, that's the most important thing. Fine, you can look at other things like the cities and all. I mean, that one is non-negotiable. You just can't go into a country and just go everywhere. You have to look at where you can find your feet very easily and penetrate very easily. Business is all about strategy. It's not just about just doing anything. You just have to be sure what you are doing. So I think that's what I can say for now.
Yeah, I think that leads to a really good point. And I think Tolaram has, I think one of their companies, Multipro, is one of the largest companies in sales as well as distribution in West Africa, with networks in Nigeria, Ghana, and also other parts of the region. So maybe I'll get Mr. Deepak Singhal to share a little bit more also about his perspective in relation to the questions that have been mentioned.
Yeah, so I would say there are a lot of white spaces still in Africa, and we believe that African consumer is like any other consumer. He would go for high quality and value for money products. So few categories that come to my mind is like plant-based milk or dairy products, because currently Africa relies heavily on the dairy itself, imported from Europe. So if we have those kind of locally produced products will be useful. Snacking still is a very nascent stage in the continent, I would say. There's huge scope for going into different snacks in the country, in different countries. Of course, selection of countries, as everybody said, that it has to be done by moving around, going there, finding out, and also you go city by city. Just to give you a sense, Lagos itself, where I'm sitting today, is more than 20 million people, which is 4 times of Singapore. So the size does matter. When we went into it, we first saw cities 10 million plus, then we went to 5 million plus, then 1 million plus kind of cities in different countries in the continent. It's hard to say a particular category that you pick. What you are doing today is you have to take the same products across, but you have to localize to the taste of the local consumer. You can't be having a global brand and bring it here and expect to consume the same, because the palate is not the same. It's very different. That's where a lot of companies make mistake, and they don't want to spend energy and time to localize the product. So just to give you an example of Indomie from Indonesia, we sell it in Nigeria. The taste of the same flavors is very different. Like chicken flavor of Indomie in Indonesia is very different from chicken flavor of Indomie in Nigeria. So you have to localize, and we have done that specifically for different markets, taste changing. And within the country, of course, continent itself is 54 countries, but every country has even more diverse population. Like Nigeria, I personally consider it 3 countries in one, considering the population segmentation in terms of their taste and preferences. So I would say you have to learn the local nuances more once you spend time, and it's not very difficult. And then localize the product to the taste of the consumer and make it affordable for them. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Deepak, for insights from your end of the world. The next type I'll just circle back to Sean, because Sean has also I think he's done distribution and marketing for several different companies also in Africa throughout his professional life. So I might get Sean to also kind of like weigh in on what he thinks in terms of the taste of the different African consumers, and also the point that Charles also picked up from Ndafe's presentation, which is finding the right distributor is extremely important. And maybe also you could share on how do you go about establishing maybe your distribution network, and how do you work with a local distributor that you've identified?
I think I'll just pick up from where Deepak left earlier. I've always emphasized the fact that localization of a product is very, very important. Deepak nailed it. For anybody who wants to be in Africa, I mean, you can't assume that whatever's selling in Singapore, or for that matter, you know, if you take an emerging market like say Vietnam or Myanmar, and you think that, okay, I've got that there, and then I can actually bring the same thing across to Africa and I can actually sell it over there. But that's not going to happen. I mean, you really need to localize the product to suit the taste of the market, the consumer profile over there. And that localization can come, you know, I mean, it has to go all the way down to your packaging. I mean, just to give you an example, many of the packaging across in Africa, I mean, whether you're bringing it for Ghana, it's going to go across to the border. I mean, it's from Ghana, you have a shared border with with Burkina Faso. So your packaging should also have French language along with English language on the, on the product itself. So you can't assume that what you sell here is going to sell there. You need to localize it. That's one thing. But another thing that's really important is that shipping a product across in a container across to, say, Ghana or to Abidjan, that's one thing. I mean, the other side where the distribution happens, I mean, you got to have a partner who understands how to actually clear this product from customs. I mean, the duty structure, the customs issues over there that he will face. Because more often than not, you get a lot of buyers in Africa who are very interested in importing a product from you, but very few of them who actually understand how to actually clear the customs, how to actually, what are the duty structures that are involved over there, and how to actually distribute the product. So the importance of having a distribution network is very important. I mean, at the same time, the more important thing would be actually to work with someone who understands the infrastructure, understands the customs, the taxations within the country itself. So that aspect of the business is very important. But in order for you to understand what products you want to bring into the market, I tell you, one of my favorite things, things that I do when I'm in Africa, the first thing that I do is actually I go to a lot of the wholesale markets. Whether it's in Lagos or in Kano or, in Accra or anywhere, I make sure I walk through the wholesale market. I see what are the products that are available over there. I go to the structured retail, the wholesale market. I go to the supermarket, and I see what's available, what's not available, and that inspires me. That inspires me to look at new products that I think there's a possibility of selling it in the market. And then you work yourself backwards, you work forward, and you just see how am I actually going to bring this? How am I going to price it? What am I going to do? But that requires time. That requires a lot of time that you have to spend in the market itself. And that's my emphasis over here. Would be your time and resources, very, very important. If you look at Africa, you have to look at it in the long run, but you've got to invest in time and resource. And that's the only way you can actually penetrate the market.
Thank you, Sean, for that, for the very deep insights based from your past experience. And so we have a couple of, actually I saw a very interesting question on Q&A, which is whether there's growing demand from African consumers for FMCG that are manufactured from sustainable sources and processes, and whether there are regulations in place regarding the need to comply to sustainable manufacturing. So I think this is quite interesting. I haven't quite thought about it that way, but I'm not sure if perhaps Deepak, Sean, or Charles, you've had any experience with manufacturing from sustainable sources and processes. Maybe I'll just ask if Deepak would be able to kind of maybe lend us some insight first.
Yeah, hi. So it's not as prevalent yet, but it's changing. Consumers are being aware now. World is very small now. Consumers are aware that of sustainable and non-sustainable products. So they do, as consumer, ask for it. But of course, until it translates into a affordable product, it won't be effective enough. So there is a small portion of consumers who are ready to pay a premium for sustainable products, but largely they are not. Consumers are aware, but they are waiting for the affordable products in those categories. That's my insight.
So for Charles, have you come across perhaps sustainable manufacturing in your space of consumer electronics, or whether perhaps your customers having maybe 3 Energy Stars, 4 Energy Stars, which is what we have in Singapore, whether that kind of makes a difference to their purchasing decision?
Yeah. So it's perfect. The same situation is here in Ghana, for example. If you have to bring in freezers, fridges, any energy consuming appliance, air conditioners, it has to meet the standard authorities requirements. And with this, you have to liaise with the manufacturer to make sure the requirements are met before the items get to the port. Other than that, they won't be allowed into the country. So these requirements you have to know before you bring any goods with those particular requirements into a country. So with this, that's where issue of knowing the specifics of each country comes to play. You have to know everything about the country and things requiring, talking about particular things requiring your knowledge regarding what is expected of you. So yes, it's here. There are such requirements, and you have to know. You have to. I can talk about electronics now. If it comes to food, too, yes, food. You have to have the authorization from the Food and Drugs Authority in Ghana, for example, and the standards boards, the standard board. If you don't have, you can't import food into a country. So yes, you need those heads up. Yeah.
Sorry, Wenning, I would like to add here that we as an organization have started our journey on sustainability, and we are making sure that we as an our organization look at how can we make ourselves reduce our carbon footprint and become one of the most sustainable organization on the continent. For it, we've started the journey. I know it's a long journey, but looking at already like energy needs, how to move to, I mean, our manufacturing facilities can have they start with the power in terms of how we use the what kind of electric lighting we use. If we've started using some solar also in our operations. So how can we make it more sustainable? Green, the gas generation of electricity through gas is also a big. Moving away from coal and diesel is also a big step. Thank you.
I think the kind of answers I'm kind of like hearing is that basically African consumers, they make decisions in very similar ways from other consumers do as well, which is basically based on their own budget, value for money. They want to do good as well. It never hurts to basically incorporate some CSR and also some elements of sustainability, and providing it doesn't compromise the kind of value for money you're delivering to the consumers. Let me just try and pick up a few more questions from the Q&A. So there's another one, which is, I think, quite pertinent, which is from Mr. Jean Bocas to the panelists. So especially with working with African partners, because Singapore is really quite far away from the African continent. So one of the things is we would probably need to be finding partners, local partners in Africa. So I think his question is, how effective do you see communication and good relationships with African counterparts to help you emerge and grow your business across the continent? So I think he's probably looking at, his question is probably phrased in the frame asking about from Singapore companies' point of view. But I think for Charles, you could also answer from the African partners' point of view, like how do you see working with another foreign partner? So how's the relationship? What do you think are some of the important points for Singapore companies to take a note of when they're trying to identify and also work with African partners? So I might start with maybe Charles, since I kind of like put that to you first.
All right, so you have to really be sure of the person you are dealing with regarding their capabilities. You just can't pour money or deal with just anybody you are not really sure of. So that's why you have to really do a good research on the market and see who you are dealing with. That can they really help you to achieve your objectives with regards to penetrating into the market. Now, as I indicated earlier, you have to identify someone or a company or a partner who has a strong distribution channel or strong distribution capabilities. You know, doing anything regarding consumer goods, it's all about the goods getting to a customer. So how can the goods get to a customer? First point is marketing and distribution. You know, I always say if you have gold and it's under the bed, who will know you have gold? So you have to get a partner who really understands market, who really knows what to do to really get to the market, so that when the goods come onto the market, it will not struggle. You can bring goods, we can have everything positive. If the people don't accept it and don't associate with the product, they are not going to buy it. So first of all, marketing is very, very key. You have to be visible. The product has to be known onto the market, and it has to be, it has to get to the customer. So I believe in position yourself. I mean, there are central business districts all over the place. I mean, every city has its own central business district, but I believe in getting close to the customer. So that's why we have shops all over the place. So the customer doesn't have to travel several miles before they get to the product they want to purchase. So there has to be a strong distribution channel. And now, apart from the physical spaces, apart from the brick and mortar, internet is doing everything for businesses now. What do you call it? Internet business. I mean, I want to remember the word. I forgot it. But online business. I mean, online businesses, online trading, online retailing is e-commerce. That's the word I want. E-commerce is now the order of the day. E-commerce is just doing magic. You have a very good e-commerce website. People go onto a website and they do their orders. It's delivered to them. They pay either by Visa or by mobile money or by cash, whatever means they opt for. And it's also another game changer. I call it the new oil. It's just easy like that, you know. And so you have to really identify. It's two things. It's either you come onto the market yourself, if you are far away from the market, it's that you come onto the market yourself, study the market and know what you want to do, or get a good partner here who has already been in the system for several years and has built some very good experiences and can really make things very fast for you. And with that, you know, you can ride on the back of that experience and that advantage and make some very good successes, achieve some very good successes, you know, in penetrating into the market. So I mean, in a nutshell, get a good distributor or a good company with a good channel who really understand the basics of the market, and you can make some very good penetration, you know, can make some very good penetration, and also the product line should appeal to all the facets of the market. I constantly hit hard on this thing, because you should not just assume and bring anything onto the market. It should conform to what the people want, and it will make things very easy for you. You will not struggle, you know, because if you know, it's a two-way affair. You are giving something, the other people are receiving. So if you are giving what they want, it will be very, very easy for you, you know. So distribution and the product. I mean, that's the mix. That's the formula to go with. Yeah.
Maybe I'll invite Sean, because you know, from a international company's point of view or Singapore company's point of view, how do you think you could how do you think like a Singapore company or international company could kind of help their distributors along as well? Like, you know, I think the question about communication and how do you have that relationship, you know, is there something that a Singapore company or the international company could do as well to make that relationship more successful?
I think first and foremost, I think you should not treat the relationship as transactional. If you have a transactional relationship with your clients or your partners, then that's all it's going to be. I mean, it's not going to go beyond, you know, the dollars and the cents. So your relationship with your business partner or with the person that you plan to work with in country should be something that is a very close relationship, where it's going to be a win-win situation where both of you get out of this. I mean, it's going to be it's just not about just the profits alone. It's about the growth. So I think, you know, first and foremost, Singapore companies should not treat any relationships with African partners as just transactional. You have to bring something different, something unique to the table. You have to bring your know-how. I mean, I think you have to have some form of USP. Like with Charles, I mean, Charles has so many different brands. I mean, you know, well-known brands, you know, but what can you actually bring to Charles? I mean, that he doesn't already have. And if there is something that is really unique, I mean, then it's beneficial to Charles, it's beneficial to you. So I think, you know, in terms of distribution-wise, I mean, everyone is in the process of learning from each other. I think if you look at it in that way, if you can actually help your partner grow and you help his distribution grow, and you can actually add value to that distribution, to his marketing, to his sales, I think that would really make that whole relationship very effective, you know, and just start on that basis. You know, don't let it be like, you know, I'm going to sell you this and you got to pay me this, and that's the end of it. Then you call him up and tell him, you know, are you going to order the next round? You know, it's about time. No, don't do that. I mean, it's not something that I believe in doing. I can tell you I've got customers that I've worked with 15 years ago, and until today, I may not be doing the same business with them, you know, as I was 15 years ago, but they've remained as friends. And anytime I can pick up the phone, if I need any information on anything in country, you know, they're willing to help me out, and that's only possible if you don't treat the relationship as being transactional. You know, that's all I can say.
Yeah. So maybe I'll get Deepak to also give his comments, and maybe Adafe to chime in as well on the same question, like that about working with Africans, the kind of relationships to basically, you know, ease your way and to actually grow your business in Africa.
I think Sean has put it very rightly that it should not be, it's not a transactional relationship. It's a long-term relationship where you cherish, both the partners cherish each other, and they give you a lot of insights. Mutual respect is very important. Of course, you might be big in your geography, but in their geography, you are coming into their markets, you are a startup. So you have to be respecting their point of view in the markets they operate in, and also add value to them, as Sean said, coming from different countries, giving different perspectives and working it together. Not that shipping relationship is shipping the container, I made my money, now it's your problem whether product goes to the market or doesn't go to the market. No, you have to build it together. It's a partnership. It's not a buyer-seller relationship. Then only you can build a long-term business. Otherwise, you will just trade in certain containers, and then the business might be stopped if he finds another source anywhere else better or cheaper, right? So long-term business, you have to have long-term relationship, and long-term relationship you only build by knowing the partner well.
Hey, thank you, Deepak. So I'm hearing about brand building, really investing into a long-term view. So maybe I'll get Adafe, which to kind of like chime in and give his comments on this as well.
Thanks, Wen. I think listening to Deepak, Sean, and Charles, clearly they've articulated it well. Take a long-term view of the market, build those relationships. But I'll just add on top of that, it's do your due diligence pretty well in understanding the distributors, because it's very key. And the beauty of Africa right now, if you look at Tolaram and a few other of those entities that are well-established, they are well-established distribution companies. They understand the local market and the nuances. So it's good to always partner with that as a first step to get into those markets. Just touch of the e-commerce. We've seen Jumia right now sitting in Nigeria, most of the African, we can see that and import goods from China. This is basic importation on retail basis. Those are some of the ways you can get into those markets beyond just establishing a relationship with your distributors. But knowing your distributors well and building a long-term relationship is key.
Okay. Yep. So
just to add to it. Sorry, yes, 1 minute. Just to add to it, there's a lot of apart from Jumia, there are a lot of now digitized platform coming up to help you to retail your product into the country, not just B2C but B2B. There are a lot of companies which have set up, and that can be also a good platform for anybody to start off testing waters in different markets.
Yes, most certainly. And I'd welcome any Singapore companies that want to get in touch with, say, even Jumia, because we did an earlier session with Jumia, and also any of the other e-commerce players that are localized, to get in touch with SBF, and we will try our best to link you up with our contacts on the ground. So we're almost, we're kind of like 4 minutes over time. I do have actually one very curious question, which I wanted to ask Adafe to kind of like elaborate on, because he mentioned it in his slides, which is on the African Continental Free Trade Area, which came into effect earlier this year. Supposed to boost trade and investment on the continent by encouraging broader and deeper economic integration. So in this case, could I just kind of like get the panelists kind of like give a last round of comments on like where do you see this free trade area influencing the growth and development of Africa's consumer goods industry in Africa?
Okay, so it's really is going to help. It's really going to boost trade among African countries. Currently, just a few days ago, they had a conference here in Accra, and they are doing this trade initiative, guided trade initiative, 96 products by 8 countries who have started. So now it's in operation. It's no more a thing on paper anymore. They signed a thing in 2018, and just a few months ago, they started operationalizing it. So you have companies in Ghana importing coffee from Rwanda, importing batteries from Kenya. Also, there's a country in Ghana, in tiles, going to export to Cameroon, you know, and also is importing meat from Egypt. Ghana, a Ghanaian company importing meat from Egypt. So these about eight countries: Egypt, Ghana, Kenya, Rwanda, Mauritius, Tanzania, and I think Malawi also, Malawi or Tunisia, 8 of them, you know. And so it's an operation. It's going to boost trade anyway, but that doesn't mean it's going to affect trade relations with countries or from other continents. I don't think so, because Africa, as it stands now, imports most of the things from China and from Asia, you know. So it's good. It's happening. It's happening. It started, and I believe it's going to be consolidated. But I mean, at the end of the day, I always say trade is all about a win-win situation. If anybody believes they are going to get extra benefits from wherever they are going to import from, they are going to import from. You know, what AfCFTA seeks to do is to remove or reduce tariffs. That's the basic thing AfCFTA seeks to do. It doesn't mean that it is going to affect trade relations with other countries outside of the continent. So yeah, so that's the update on AfCFTA as far as I'm concerned, as far as I know.
Okay, if I could just get a quick round of comments from Deepak, Sean, and then Adafe.
Yeah, so in my opinion, AfCFTA is a big thing. It's the implementation which will be the challenge, but if it's implemented well, it will boost the entire GDP of Africa. Africa has beautiful land across the whole continent is one actually. So you can, the logistic can improve a lot more. Just to give you a sense, it's cheaper to ship a container from Lagos to China than to ship from Lagos to Accra, which is, 4 hours drive from here versus thousands of miles away. So all this has to be fixed. Within Africa, the trade has to improve and grow, and AfCFTA is the right step in that direction. It's already started showing results. Many countries have already started doing that. But if all countries start effectively doing it, then when people talk about Africa as one continent, can become a reality in terms of logistics.
Sean?
I think I agree.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I agree to what Deepak just mentioned. You know, the logistics is basically the main challenge. You know, other than that, things will be very easy amongst the several countries. But I think the main challenge is, but I mean, it's good to start from somewhere. So let's see how it goes. You know.
Yeah. So
I think at the end of the day, it's going to benefit the people of Africa. I think jobs will be created, investments will be coming in, incomes will be raised. I think overall, in the long run, I am actually very happy Because if you look at this, this is the largest free trade agreement in terms of number of countries, and I think in terms of the land size, if I'm not mistaken. And if you look at Africa right now, it's 1.3 billion people. I mean, the GDP, I think Charles mentioned it earlier, I think it's around about 3 trillion at the moment. So I'm very happy for the people of Africa. You know, I think it's going to be really good. I spoke to a couple of companies, you know, in one in Nigeria and one in Ghana. I think there's a little bit of apprehension, and you know, they feel threatened because they will open up the countries to you know, competition. But personally, again, I think competition is good. You know, it keeps you on your toes. So I think this is going to be good. It's going to be good overall.
So, Adafe, maybe the last comment from you.
Thanks, Wayne. I think Sean did hit the nail on the head. It's supposed to improve integration of the African countries and encourage even foreign companies to come and establish value-added facilities within Africa to add value locally and to substantial so to be able to move those goods around easily. I think that's very key. The continent look to benefit hugely because Africa is a huge market. Yes, the diversity is there, but goods moving around. You just heard example that Deepak gave, moving goods between Ghana and Nigeria is even more expensive than moving between Nigeria and China. So some of those trade barriers, stuff like that, and improve the intra-African trade. I think the devil is in the detail, which is the implementation. But it's long overdue, and we're seeing some positivity. There's been apprehension around Africa being a dumping ground, which is some other country bringing in things and trying to move it around. But I think things have been put in place to prevent that and to ensure that those goods are substantially produced in Africa for them to move around easily and freely. I think for anybody looking to come in, it's understanding what the AfCFTA promises and how to dive in there and take advantage of that will benefit everybody, both the Africans and the foreign companies. Thank you.
Thank you, Adafe, and our panelists today. So I think what I've kind of like gotten from hearing in terms of responses and also speaking with other companies about the various aspects of doing business in Africa is that the Continental Free Trade Area is definitely a good first step towards the right direction. It's bringing together more than 50 countries to sign an agreement, you know, putting together commitments to try and put in place higher standards to facilitate trade and investment in Africa. That's definitely something we can look forward to. At the same time, I think we've also heard several times during the panel discussion today is that Africa is not about a quick win. It is in that market that kind of like takes patience, but if you're willing to put in the time and the effort to reach out to our African partners and to understand them, you know, it's a market. It's a really, really vast continent with great opportunities. So even though there are challenges, but Africa as a continent, like the title of our first webinar in this series, you know, it is challenging, but there's always great promises if you put in the time and the effort to try and understand the kind of potential benefits that they can reap you. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and also our speakers today. We've come to the end of our today's session. We hope that this webinar has provided you with useful information and inspired you to explore the markets of the African continent. Please feel free to contact us at SBF if you need more information about Africa. I think there's still some open questions inside the Q&A. We'll try and get back to you via email. Our next festival webinar, as shown on the slide, is upcoming. So if you're interested to take part in this next festival webinar, please feel free to scan the QR code. It'll take you to the registration site. So on behalf of the Singapore Business Federation, I would like to thank you, our audience, our partners and speaking organizations, our very esteemed speakers for participating in our webinar today. So we look forward to seeing you at our future events on Africa. Please feel free to contact me and also the rest of the Global Connect team if you ever need anything. Thank you.